Well, it's Monday night and I should be at work, but here I am at home again. The chemo for 5 months, I sailed through it. Wasn't that big a deal. And the last 3 weeks, it's just hammered me. I still a little short of breath and dizzy all the time. That may or may not be related. And I threw up this afternoon several times, and I don't know. But thankfully, I'm done with it for the present, for the last 2 weeks anyway. Um, my cancer markers were up at 2100 when we began. They're down to 387. And week after next, I'll have scans, 3 CAT scans, and then the week after that, we'll go to Mayo for consultation, and hopefully, we'll either go on to radiation from there and or to surgery, or one or the both. But we'll see. But hopefully, I'm done with chemo for a while. Stephen Lawson dramatically begins his book when all hell breaks loose. There comes a time in every life when all hell breaks loose. Suddenly, unexpectedly, cataclysmically, all hell breaks loose. One day life is sunny, calm, clear, predictable. Our job is secure, our children behave, our health is good. Then out of the blue, like a violent, angry thunderstorm blowing across our landscape, tragedy strikes. We're hit hard. All hell breaks loose. Suddenly our life is stormy, dark, overcast, turbulent, threatening, boiling, swirling, out of control. Lightning strikes our life and we go up in flames. All hell breaks loose. Our life becomes engulfed in the fire. Our soul is torched. Our faith is scorched. Our heart is singed and scared. We have been held into life's backdraft. Permanent scars begin to form. All hell breaks loose. Am I ever going to pass through the flames? Our heart aches. Will I survive life's inferno? It happens to all of us. Friday comes and our pay envelope includes a termination notice. Our doctor's expression scares us. The reports don't look good. We need to operate. Our maid announces that they are leaving. Our child seemingly rejects everything we tried to teach them. Life plays hardball. Life hurts. One way or another, tragedy touches every one of us. And when life is hard, we ask, where are you, God? Are you there? Don't you care? Are you loving but impotent? Are you powerful but passive? Where are you, God, when life hurts? Last week, we began a new series on trusting God through tough times. We suggested that suffering and the problem of evil are the toughest challenges that will ever come to our faith, and that coming to grips with suffering and evil requires, as it were, putting together the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. We don't have the box top and won't see the whole picture until we get to heaven. But the more pieces we are able to put together in the meantime, the better we will be able to deal with trials and temptations. Last week, I suggested the first piece of the puzzle, that is, that sin is the ultimate cause of all suffering and problems. Sin is not the immediate cause of all of our struggles, but it is the ultimate cause. We live in a fallen place among a fallen race, and nothing will ever be perfect this side of heaven. We were made for Eden, but we no longer live there, and thus we will inevitably have trouble in this life. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to do an overview of the book of Job, the book most often thought of in relationship to suffering and evil. Job is one of the two oldest books in the Bible. It may be set historically around the time of Abraham. And Job has three basic sections. In chapters 1 and 2, there's the story of Job and what happened to him. In chapters 3 to 27, Job and some of his, or 3 to 37, Job and some of his friends try to figure out why these things have happened. In chapters 38 to 42, God speaks to Job. Today I'm going to do things a little different and read most of Job 1 and 2 and make comments as we go through. I will then conclude with the primary lessons we can learn from these chapters. So beginning in verse 1, in the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. The man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to take turns holding feasts in their homes, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. The point is, Job had it about as good as life gets in this life. He had a large family, he was extremely wealthy, he was highly respected. But most important of all, he was righteous. He was blameless. He feared God and he shunned evil. If anybody did not deserve to suffer, it was Job. But beginning in verse 6, the scene shifts from earth to heaven. Verse 6, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. Now, I don't know what you believe about angels or Satan, but the Bible mentions angels at least 275 times in 34 of its 66 books. The Bible teaches that angels were created by God before his creation of our world. But the Bible also teaches that one angel, most commonly identified as Satan or the devil, was jealous of God and wanted to take his place and lead a revolt against God. Satan has been waging a war against God since before the creation of the world. The Bible teaches that Jesus settled his defeat at the cross. But until Jesus returns, the devil is still leading a revolt against God and doing everything he can to get people to join him against God. And in the book of Job, Satan comes before God, and in verse 7, the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." God not only reaffirms what the book has already said about Job, but says in effect that Job is the most faithful person on the planet. But Satan says, verse 9, "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied, "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." Satan says in effect, "Give me a break, God. Job's not really righteous. He's just got a good deal. He trusts in you because you've been so generous to him. Job doesn't trust in you because of who you are, but because of what he gets out of you. Job doesn't really care about you. Job cares about all the gifts you give him. Take away your gifts, and then you'll see if he really trusts you." Satan thus insults both God and man. Satan insults man by saying that the only reason human beings ever trust God is for what we can get out of him. We don't love God, we just use him. We are pragmatists or utilitarians. We like God because he's useful to us. And if God ceases to be useful to us, then we will no longer love him. But worse yet, Satan insults God. He says that God has to bribe humans to get them to love him. He says that God is not worthy of worship because of who he is, but only because of what he can do for us. In other words, in our story, everyone's reputation is at stake. If Satan is right, then Job and other humans are only hypocrites who use God. And God is not good enough to be worthy of worship in and of himself. Satan, as it were, challenges God to a cosmic wager. God, let's see if humans really believe you are good. And God takes Satan's wager. Verse 12. The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and God says in effect, "Satan, you can take anything you want from Job." And so, verse 13, one day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who's escaped to tell you." And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, "Your sons and your daughters were feasting and drinking at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you." This is not what we would expect. God let Satan kill all of Job's children, take away all of his prosperity. How else can we possibly read the story? God let Satan take away all of his gifts, and how does Job respond? Verse 20. At this, Job got up, tore his robe, shaved his head, then he fell to the ground and worshipped, and said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Now imagine losing all of your children at once. Imagine losing all of your possessions. How would we respond? Job responds not only with grief, but with worship. When all hell breaks loose and Job loses everything, he praised God. Truly, Job was a remarkably righteous man. God allowed Satan to take everything, and nothing changed in Job's attitude toward God. He confesses that all the good things he had were gifts from God, and they were God's to take back if he so choose. That is faith. That is a God-centered man. Job knew that life was about God rather than him, and he chose to praise God irregardless of his circumstances. Job did not trust God for what he could get out of God, but Satan is not yet ready to give up, and so Job 2 begins, On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. And the Lord said to Satan, Where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Then the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Note that God, in some sense, takes ultimate responsibility here for what has happened to Job. Verse 4 continues, Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. Satan says in effect, Okay, God, you let me take Job's family and prosperity, but that's not really that bad. If you really want to see if Job truly trusts you, let me attack him physically. When people suffer excruciating, inescapable pain, then we find out what they really believe. Losing loved ones, losing possessions are tough, but when our every breath is miserable, we'll find out what we really feel about God. Verse 6 continues, The Lord said to Satan, Very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. The book of Job goes on to identify at least 15 different symptoms of Job's physical suffering. But what exactly he had is beside the point. Job sitting among the ashes means that he has taken residence up in the city dump. This could be a sign of his mourning or that his symptoms are so disgusting that he is socially unacceptable. Verse 9, Job's wife said to him, Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. Job's wife trusted God for what she could get out of him. When God deals her husband a bad hand, she sides with Satan and tells Job to join Satan's side as well. But Job replies in verse 10, You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. This is one of the most amazing statements of faith in all the Bible. Job says, God is trustworthy regardless of our circumstances. God must never be judged by our circumstances. Our circumstances must always be judged by God. Circumstances change, but God doesn't. God is always good regardless of our present situation. Well, that's the setting for the rest of the book of Job. Job begins with incredible faith, but as we'll see through the rest of the book, his faith greatly wavers. Now, this is an incredibly rich story. We could identify dozens of practical lessons for our lives from these chapters, but let me suggest 4 primary lessons for us today. First, suffering reminds us that we have a dangerous enemy who is the ultimate source of all evil. Satan is not God's evil twin. Satan was created by God. He is not present everywhere, nor does he know everything, but he is powerful and dangerous. And when God permits, Satan can take lives and destroy entire civilizations. 1 Peter 5:8, similar to our passage today, says, Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. To play into Satan's hands is self-destructive folly. I said last week that sin is the ultimate source of all the suffering and evil in life, but where did sin come from? Why did Adam and Eve fall into sin? Because they yielded to the temptations of the first sinner, Satan. Sin began with Satan. So Satan is even more fundamentally the cause of all suffering and evil in life. All the bad things that ever happen in life go back to sin and to Satan. We seldom think about it in our day and age, but the Bible pictures this life as caught up in a cosmic, invisible war. God and his forces and the devil and his forces are locked into a universal battle that won't be resolved until Jesus returns. However, the Bible does say that Satan's defeat is guaranteed by Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. But until Jesus returns, Satan is doing everything he can to take people to hell with him or to make our lives here hellish. Satan is a very real, very dangerous enemy doing everything he can to destroy us. Our passage today is not the only passage in the Bible to say that Satan can even take life. Right? If you got notes, Hebrews 2:14, 1 John 3:12, 1 Corinthians 5:5. The question is how much that happens in our lives is similar to what is going on here in Job. Is our pandemic the work of God or the work of Satan? When bad things happen in our lives, are they done by the devil? I would say that in all probability, none of us are significant enough, Job-like enough, to have had Satan do something directly like this in our lives. But on the other hand, I would say that we probably all have had Satan's co-conspirators, the demons, do similar things in our lives. Demons probably have orchestrated personal attacks, loss of jobs, loss of health, or even the loss of loved ones. Satan's demons are probably constantly attacking us, and we aren't even aware of it. There are two extremes when it comes that we're all prone to regarding Satan and the demons. As C.S. Lewis suggests in the Screwtape Letters, Satan and the demons always try to get us to gravitate toward one of two extremes, either to practically deny the existence of Satan and the demons, or to be obsessed with them. Some Christians do find a demon under every bush, and some Christians deny that there is a real enemy to even consider. We don't have time today to begin to say all that we could say about resisting the devil, but we only hurt ourselves if we pretend that the devil and demons are not real and dangerous. Besides learning that we dare not deny a real enemy who is the ultimate source of all the evil in life, we also learn from Job 1 and 2 that suffering challenges us to decide who is the sovereign in life. Whenever hard things happen to us, there are two different things to sort through. There is our understanding of suffering and evil, and our response to suffering evil, what some call the theological or philosophical problem of evil, and the personal or religious problem of evil. Most of what we're doing in this series will be about understanding the problem of evil. Most of what we're doing will be about preparing us about how to think about the evil that will come. But if you're in the midst of suffering, if you have recently or in the midst of losing a loved one or your job or your health, then I must warn you, our personal responses to suffering are much more complex than merely understanding it. How we think about suffering is crucial and foundational and determinative. But when anyone is in great pain, as we'll see in 2 weeks in Job, theoretical discussions about suffering can often hurt as much as they help. Understanding pain and evil on some level is one thing. Responding to it is another. And we will deal with questions in this series that may be hard for you. For example, let me introduce here just an issue that we'll deal with more later. We can hardly read Job 1 and 2 or go through life and not at some point ask, okay, Satan caused suffering, but if God allowed Satan to rebel, if God allowed Satan to do these horrible things to Job, then isn't God somehow chargeable with evil himself? If God allowed Satan to do some horrible things in my life, how in the world can I trust God? This question is the greatest problem with the problem of evil and suffering for every worldview, Christian or otherwise. Some argue that evil is just bad luck and no one has ultimate responsibility for it, but there are ultimately two basic possibilities regarding God's relationship to evil. Either evil is outside of God's control or evil is inside his control. Either God is sovereign over evil and has mysterious purposes in it, or God is impotent in the face of evil. Job 1 and 2 picture God as permitting Satan to do evil. God did not directly do the evil, but God did allow it. And if God does allow evil, then isn't he somehow responsible for it? We'll come back to this question after we finish Job. But suffering does cause us to ask who or what is ultimate in this life. And thirdly, suffering shows us whether we trust God. Satan thought he could just tempt Job into rejecting God. Before Job went through this awful series of events, he could not have known how far he would trust God. But God knew that he could test Job, and Job would ultimately prove faithful. The Bible reveals at least 10 different ways that God uses suffering in our lives, but one of them is to develop our faith. James 1 says to rejoice when we experience trials because the testing of our faith develops perseverance. Events come into our lives which will prove to be tests of our faith by God or temptations to sin by Satan depending on how we respond. We can never know how much we truly trust God until we go through tough times. We can never know how trustworthy God really is until we go through tough times. But every tough time confronts us with life's ultimate question: to trust God or not to trust God. That is life's ultimate question. Suffering shows us whether we trust God or not, and finally, suffering shows us why we trust God. Satan challenged Job's motives for trusting God. Satan claimed Job had a utilitarian or pragmatic faith in God. He trusted God only for what he could get out of him. If God was good to him, then he'd be good to God. And the story of Job does challenge us with why we trust God. Do we view God as our genie in the bottle that if we just rub right, we'll get our every wish? Do we view God as our insurance policy that we will fall back on when everything else fails? Do we believe that if we live right, God owes us something? Do we serve God for his glory alone, or is our trust in God really about us? If we lost everything, could we say, naked I came from the womb, naked I will depart? The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. If we have horrific health issues going on, could we say, shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Let me say a word of prayer. Father, life is about you, not about us. And you have promised us that we will have trials and suffering in this life. And we have to make a choice how we respond. We will respond better if we are prepared beforehand in understanding suffering and evil. And I pray as we go through this series the next few weeks that it would help people put together some of the pieces of the puzzle, perhaps the greatest puzzle in life, that will give them a framework to begin to see how and why we should respond to whatever you allow or bring into our lives. We praise in Jesus' name. Amen.